And we're live. Welcome back, guys, to another episode of the Solvable Mysteries podcast. My name is Yuras. As every week, I'm joined by Glenn Highcove. How are you feeling, man?
Hey, I'm doing okay. Somewhat interested to go through this case today for one of the reasons is before you and I even started doing this show back in the a couple of years ago, feels like forever now, like because YouTube's changed so much. I used to watch like these true crime and like spooky video compilations, and this was actually one of the ones that used to pop up all the time. Uh, on there, but I didn't really know that much about the case.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to be talking about Tara Calico's case, and I knew about this case way before I even started the podcast with you, man, because essentially this case has that really creepy Polaroid picture. And I mean, upon further investigating this case on my own, I kind of realized that it's not really, the case is not what it is actually. And I think one of those, well, wouldn't you agree that those spooky videos that link Tara Calico to that Polaroid picture, they don't necessarily do this case justice, and it almost feels like they want to exploit the scenario for, for a heightened interest of maybe, just regular casual people who don't really look into true crime stuff in depth. They just look at it, uh, you know, they don't really dig down that deep, and it's something interesting for them to see. But if you would really dig into it, well, I think the likelihood of Tara Calico being the girl in the Polaroid picture is pretty slim. And well, we'll definitely go over it. We'll show pictures and we will discuss why that is. But my question to you is, do you think that those people who made those spooky videos, do you think that they are purposely sensationalized the scenario? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think so. I think they take I mean, to be most charitable, I would say they take a shallow
Yeah.
approach to it. They're definitely not digging deep. A lot of times it was coming up in like the, you know, five spookiest, XYZ videos. Just as a side note,
Yeah.
one of the dudes that does it, he's got like this really annoying voice. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, where he goes, I like every time I used to put it on, it would drive everybody in the house crazy because I'm like, why can't this guy just talk right?
Oh
Like it
yeah.
wasn't, and you know what I mean? Just for clarification, it's not that he had an accent or something, and like obviously, we already talked about. It's obviously it's hard to talk in a language not your native. Like this is English is his native language, but the guy had like this weird inflection, and
Yeah.
it always I think it almost made it worse. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know. I think I know exactly who we're talking about. But
Yeah.
that's yeah. But let's leave him out of this, and
Yeah.
let's jump into the case. I think. Okay, so Taro Calico case. Okay, so the way that I kind of thought to go through this case, essentially just go through the profile of Taro Calico. After the profile, I would want to jump to the details of the case. Then I would want to investigate and inspect the pictures that we have in this case. And lastly, I want to really delve deeper into the case files and read a certain case document that will shed some more light on the disappearance of Tara Calico, and maybe will answer some questions. So starting off with the profile of Tara Calico, well, she was a student and she was 19 years of age at the time of her disappearance. She was born on February 28th, 1969. Her height was 5'7". She weighed 120 pounds. Her general characteristics were Caucasian female, brown hair with a cowlick, whatever that is, I'm not really sure. Green eyes, large scar on back of right shoulder, brown birthmark on back of one leg, and large scar on her calf. So that large scar on her calf will play a big role. And regarding her profile, I didn't really dig that deep into her, like how she was as a person. I know that she was dating a man. Well, she essentially had a boyfriend at that point. Her boyfriend was Jeff Beta, and he happened to be a local drug seller. I'm not sure how much that will play a role into this case. But she was dating a drug seller, but she seemed like a very nice girl. And
I gotta jump in for a second because I've kind of heard back and forth depending on the source.
of
Like,
course,
as I understand it, that was what was alleged um, in one of the interviews with somebody who had a version of the story of what happened to her. But then the other people in her life, like her family, said that her boyfriend was the former quarterback of the same high school she went to.
oh,
Um,
seriously?
and that he was like a stand-up guy, like a like a winner, not a so it's
Hmm.
interesting, you know what I mean? So right here, right away, it's interesting because we get a little bit of like haziness. I mean, I guess in theory it could be both, but um yeah, that was what I'd heard, is that that was one of the conflicting
Ah.
points in terms of, yeah, verifying,
Mm-hmm.
whether the stories people were telling were true or not.
I see. I see. No, that's a good point. That's a good point because that's the only thing I had on him because I wasn't really focusing on that part of her personal life. Anything else you want to add on her, like in terms of her personal life? I think the only thing else that I know is that Tara Calico was an active girl and she liked to take bike rides. And well, one of these bike rides will lead to her disappearance, and she would take them with her mother. But other than that, other than she was a student and an active person, I don't really have any more details. Do you have anything else on her, or should we move past the profile?
Yeah, I mean, what was described about her was that she was somebody that I would say was both a very nice person and a winner. So what I mean by that is, she was nice in that one of the stories was, um, there was a girl at her high school who was sort of not really that social, didn't really have a lot of friends yet, and who only was involved in maybe one or two activities, and was sort of over sitting by herself. And right away, Tara was like, "Oh, come hang out with us," and made her like one of her best friends just out of the blue. You know what I mean? Which, I mean, for any of us that ever had a hard time socializing or were shy, you know, in middle school or high school, I mean, that's almost the best thing that could ever happen to you, if like a really nice person, who's a good influence, were to just suddenly take you under their wing and give you like a like sort of deliver a social life right to your front door. Um, so that was one thing, and then the other thing about her was that she seemed to really have, I mean, especially compared to how people are now, where, we all kind of wish that we would have a really balanced life of like staying athletic and, maybe doing sports and hobbies, but also focusing on like, the future and our studies and things like that. Well, yeah, she was really, and having a social life, like she had everything going on. So she's, exercising and, playing tennis and riding her bike. She was on a bunch of sports teams in high school. I believe she was a good student, and she was, attending university at this point. The point of what we're going to cover today, and then had this relationship, which, at least the surface description of the relationship was, it was almost like, two popular athletic people um, starting to date. Funny enough, not even in high school, but after high school is when their
Yeah,
relationship started. So,
I see.
and then you look at her pictures, and she's, obviously an attractive, vibrant person. So,
Yeah, that's okay. It seems that you had more intel in that respect. But now jumping to September 20th, 19 1988 is basically the day when Tara Calico disappeared. And I'm gonna quote a bit of a Wikipedia for the general gist of it, and I wanna throw it back to you a lot. So she rode the route almost every morning and was sometimes accompanied by her mother, Patty Dole. So I'm talking about the bike ride. She would used to take bike rides and with her mother. And I want to immediately jump to the Google Map for everyone who's watching this on our YouTube channel. We have the Google Earth open, and we just have like the location points. So this is Tara's home, and by the way, this is Belen. A pretty, I wouldn't say, like actually a fairly sizable city in New Mexico. It was in the Valencia County. And now this is her home where Tara would live with her mother, and she would take bike rides along with her mother. And basically, the general gist of the bike ride would be, from what I've gathered, she would leave her home, she would drive next to this. I think it's some sort of a interstate section. I don't know, Road 47, a Highway 47. It's Rio Communities Boulevard 47, and she would drive, I think, right up to this point. Right up to, I'm sorry, right up to this point, right up to the point where the Boulevards Road 47 would hit the railways, and they would turn back, and they would drive all the way back home. You know why this is important for me to show the exact route for everyone in the audience members, and maybe for you as well, man, because one of the vagueness that's being reported in this case is that well, essentially on the morning when Tara disappeared, she told her mother, Patty Dole, to come and get her if she was not home by noon. But let's remember, she leaves at around 9 a.m. to 9:30 a.m. in the morning, and she tells her mother, come pick me up if I'm not back home by essentially 12 p.m., you know what I mean, noon. And initially I found it kind of strange because pick her up from where, you know what I mean? Like there wasn't like a certain location that Tara was heading to. She was just going on a regular bike ride. And when the research that I did, everyone kind of seems to state that the mother was supposed to go pick her up from somewhere, but it was never really stated from where exactly. So she was actually since the bike ride that she took was really linear, the only thing you need to do is go enter your vehicle and just literally drive across Rio Communities Boulevard 47, and you should in theory run into Tara. And 12 p.m. kind of came, noon kind of came, and Tara wasn't home yet. So her mother, Patty Dole, did decide to go and see if her daughter was okay. But now, in this linear road that Tara was doing her bike ride, her mother, Patty Dole, could not locate Tara, and that's when law enforcement was informed. So yeah, your take on the whole route, I guess, that Tara took.
Yeah, this is a good point because I mean, it's once again this we've had a few cases like this where sometimes they're a little bit of a time capsule, or like there'll be some piece of technology that does make a major difference in how we do things. There wasn't really mobile phones back then for normal human beings, or even really pagers, except for like doctors or something might have pagers. Like if you've ever seen Caddyshack, the old version of it. So yeah, I think from what I understand, it just thinking it through, it must have been that her mother knew her route, and the route was long. It was something like a
17 miles.
35-mile round trip or something like
Oh
that.
yeah, yeah. I think 17 miles one way.
Okay, yep, perfect. So yep. So about 35 miles round trip roughly. Um, which is funny. Someone was like, "Well, that must have taken hours," but I'm like, "No, I don't think that. I mean, if you're going 25 miles an hour, on a
Yeah.
bicycle, right? I
Yeah.
mean, you could probably do that. What? That's not even that's like maybe an hour and a half, right?
Yeah.
Um, but still, it's I mean, it's still some good amount of effort. Which, by the way, like I mean, she must have been in tremendous shape, right, to be doing that all the time. So her mother knows the route, and for reasons that we'll describe in a little bit, her mother stops going on the route, but Tara keeps doing it. Um, I feel like her mom probably was just going to drive down the route. Was just
Yeah.
going to be like, well, probably the furthest she would have to drive is 17 miles, right?
Yeah.
So probably she's going to drive for about 10 minutes, um, because probably Tara's either going to be at or past the halfway point, so on her way back, let's say.
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
then she would run into her. So that's only as long as that route, like if really isn't like more than one really obvious way to go, I feel like that'll be what the route is.
Yeah. And dude,
Yeah,
oh,
yeah, I'm glad you're showing it, by the
yeah,
way.
I'm sorry. Yeah, this is exactly what I want to say. Look how empty it is. Like devious things could happen here. And hey, I wanna bring back for I want your take on this. You kind of alluded to it, and I wanna address it immediately. Remember when you said that her mother stopped going on this route alongside with her daughter? Well, that's because at one point her mother, while she was driving on this trail, she was kind of being tailed or like stalked by another motorist. And after that, she stopped going on this route, but Tara continued going on this route. And I think Patty Dowell, Tara's mother, actually suggested that Tara would use some sort of have some sort of pepper spray on her as for self-defense. But if I'm not mistaken, Tara didn't have any. And yeah.
And actually, I'm trying to think if they even really had pepper spray. They used to use something called mace.
Yeah.
If you've ever heard of that, which is like it's similar, right? Pepper spray, I think, is more organic. It's better, probably, really. But mace, maybe that's what's like in bear spray and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I just there's some irony here we'll discuss later about that. But I guess the other thing that really kind of strikes me about what you're showing, I'm really glad you're showing it in detail because it doesn't look safe. Like even from a that's one of the reasons why I never ride my bike around like the city here. Um, because all it takes, I mean, this is a highway, right? So all it takes is somebody nudging into you by accident, and like you're toast.
Yeah.
Um, and people go flying down those freeways. I say this because I've had like a couple of relatives die this way, like get hit in the side of the road,
Hmm.
um, or on like a highway like this, like kind of a rural highway. I mean, it happens all the time. This is why, um, like they have this advice for if you have to pull over on the highway, like maybe don't even stay in your car and try to get like way off to the side, just because it just happens all the time. I mean, it's a big occupational hazard for like highway patrol people.
Exactly. And dude, the search begins for Tara, and the next day, on September 21st, 1988, pieces of Tara's Sony Walkman that she had brought with her to this, uh, bike ride because she was listening to music, I would assume. Pieces of that Sony Walkman and a cassette tape were later discovered along the road. And basically, Patty Dole believed that she might have dropped them in an attempt to mark her trail. But then once again, Patty Dole will say a lot of things that I might not necessarily agree with. But I think, just from this standpoint where I think maybe Patty Doll might be looking into it a little bit too heavy into this case, but I mean, it's her daughter, so it's all good. But now looking at the place, right, this is somewhere around this area. Well, into this direction, I would assume, because that's the information that I managed to gather. Pieces of that Sony Walkman and a cassette tape were found later on off the side of the road. So I would assume not really far into the, not far into the land, because you there's no way you could locate it. But I think maybe somewhere alongside the road, somewhere here, some cassette tapes, or at least one of them, and the pieces of the Walkman were found. So your take on this? Is this a possible way where? Is this a possible location where Tara met? Um, Whatever kind of fate she met, but is this a good location for that?
Yeah, I mean, especially given the fears I just expressed. Um, let's say it was purely accidental. I mean, just that would explain. I mean, not obviously the absence of her body or her bicycle,
Yeah,
but yeah, it's almost. I can't even imagine. Look how desolate it is out there. It doesn't seem like. And then this was like a bright yellow Sony Walkman, and this is like this is the kind of the early 80s equivalent of like an iPhone. Like not quite as expensive, or an iPod. I mean, it's we're talking about something that retailed for between 40 to $80 in 1980 to 80s, early 80s dollars, which would be probably closer to like $100 now, depending on how nice it was.
yeah,
So yeah, it's like pretty ominous.
yeah. I know. Now moving to you know other points in this story, well, several people saw Tara Calico riding her bicycle, which has never been found, by the way. But I think I have an explanation where that bicycle is, and for the later parts of this case, or for this podcast, I mean, I will tell the audience members more about it. But no one actually witnessed her presumed abduction, although several witnesses observed a light colored pickup truck, possibly a 1953 Ford, with a camper shell following closely behind her. Now, we don't really have any more intel in terms of that. Um, on June 15th, 1989, so that's 9 months later, you know, a Polaroid picture of an unidentified young woman and a boy, both gagged with black duct tape and seemingly bound, was discovered in the parking lot of a convenience store in Port St. Joe, Florida, which is 1,500 miles away. So 9 months later, and 1,500 miles away. This picture is found. Now, the woman who found the photo said that it was in a parking space where a white windowless Toyota cargo van had been parked when she arrived at the store. So it doesn't take a genius to connect the dots. Most likely, the people in the picture were also inside of that white van. Now, the woman who found the picture also said that the van was being driven by a man with a mustache who appeared to be in his 30s. Now, media took this picture and ran with it. Police actually barricaded the city like exits, so that, and they were constantly on the lookout for a similar van, but they couldn't locate it. And now this picture was actually shown on media, like in terms of just shown on various other TV shows, and some of Patty Dole's friends told that there's a picture out there circulating, and the woman in the picture kind of resembles Tara Calico, so maybe you should take a look. And then after taking a look, Patty Dole kind of was really stricken by the picture, and she almost said that, I'm 100% certain that's Tara. And let's just jump to some pictures of Tara for the audience members. So basically, this is Tara. I have a few of her pictures here. I want everyone to take a close look as I move past them. And I want to jump to the Polaroid. This is the Polaroid picture that I was referring to that was found in Port St. Joe 9 months after Tara disappeared. Now let's take it into consideration that this picture was actually shown to Polaroid officials, like the people who would make that film, you know what I mean, for the camera. And essentially, the Polaroid officials, they stated that according to the Polaroid officials, the picture had to have been taken after May of 1989 because that particular film used in this Polaroid picture was not available until May. You know what I mean? So it had to have been taken after May. And if we take this, just to build like a better just to have a better explanation for our audience members, essentially how this plays out, Tara disappears in September 1988. This picture is found 9 months later in June 1989, and Polaroid officials said that this picture must have been taken on uh, on May 1989. So what this means is that Taro disappeared 9 months ago. This picture is found, but this picture could have only been taken 1 month prior to the picture's discovery. So if we would think that the woman in this Polaroid picture is Tara, then this would mean that Tara had survived for 8 months, because only 8 months after her disappearance, this particular film was developed to be used, by the public. So that's, if this is Tara, then we know that she survived for 8 months, and if this is Tara, then we know that she was held captive alongside an unidentified boy in a white truck, a white van. I'm sorry, 1,500 miles, almost on another side of the country, essentially. So this is why I think that this is an unlikely scenario, even though we can jump to the comparisons. And some comparisons state that it's similar, some state that it's not similar. I mean, they kind of gave it to the investigative authorities in the UK, Scotland Yard, and they stated that this is, in fact, Tara Calico in the picture. FBI said that, it's our research is inconclusive, so we can't really say for certain, but that's why I don't particularly feel that this is Tara Calico in the picture, because I don't think she survived for 8 months after her disappearance, and I also don't think that if she would have, survived, that she would have been held captive in Florida of all places. I think the more likely scenario is that, unfortunately, Tara Calico met her fate and passed away soon after her disappearance. So, your thought on the picture itself, and do you hold any weight in the theory that this is in fact Tara?
Yeah, I mean, I'll add in even a little more color because, like you said, Tara's family and friends, they get kind of like looped into it, and they look at it and they, per that analysis you just showed, they're like, oh my gosh, that's her for sure. For all these reasons, and yeah, there's more than a passing resemblance. I'll just say, and I'm not laughing at the situation, but she almost looks, the girl in the with in the sort of the kidnap photo, or whether that's actually real or not. She almost looks like, she could look like a lot of people. She looks like, to me, she looks like Leah Thompson from Back to the Future, the Back to the Future trilogy. Um,
Yeah.
Obviously, it's not, but I don't know. To me, it doesn't really. I mean, there's like a little differences. People say, well, the eyebrows are different, and then they pointed out, well, if Tara was being held for 8 months, she definitely could have been like not eating as well, not obviously grooming herself, um, in terms of her eyebrows and things like that. So like her body composition could have changed over 8 months just from like bad diet, like not eating enough. But yeah, no, I mean, I guess the other thing that's worth mentioning is there might be a little bit of a phenomenon here where people there's a little bit of wishful thinking. And by wishful thinking, I don't mean that people are wishing like, oh, gee, I hope that's my daughter that's there being kidnapped, but that their daughter's still alive, right? So the reason why I say that is the boy next to the girl in the photo. Well, there was an area case that got tied to this photo as well, right? Where um,
Michael
there
Henley.
was a
Yeah, I
yeah,
have a little
yeah,
bit information. Michael Henley was a young boy who disappeared in close proximity to where Tara disappeared as well. And uh, essentially, Tara's parents and Michael Henley's parents, they both kind of looked at this picture. And Michael Henley's family, they were also almost 100% certain that this is Michael Henley. Now, what that would entail, that someone would have kidnapped both of these, you could say, well, Michael Henley was a young child, but Tara was a young adult, so they would be both kidnapped in not Albuquerque. What am I saying? In New Mexico, from Belen, around Belen, New Mexico, and would have been transported to Port St. Joe, all the way in Florida, 1,500 miles away. Now we have comparison pictures of Michael Henley. This is the resolution pictures are kind of bad, but I think with the young kids, the younger the person is, the more alike to the other young people that person is, if that makes sense. Like okay, so there's no nice way of putting it, but I feel like all the young kids, they kind of all look the same a little bit sometimes, you know what I mean? Because their their facial characters, they don't really develop until they reach adulthood. So to me,
yeah.
I don't necessarily see a striking resemblance in this picture. What would you say?
Yeah, it's funny you said that because I noticed when I was a kid that there was like a lot of kids that kind of have like Elvis face. You know what I mean? Like Elvis has a certain look when he was grown up that like I remember a couple different kids, like a kid my sister knew, and then like a kid that was on in like Problem Child, the little girl in Problem Child 2.
Yeah.
Like they kind of have like or I know the kid that plays Mike TV in the Willy Wonka movie. Like they all have Elvis face. You know, they have like they look like a little bit alike, but then when they grow up,
Yeah.
obviously your face stretches out. There's more like real estate, you know what I mean, for your face to grow into.
Yeah.
So your features, yeah, your feet as an adult, especially as hormones kick in and everything, your face expands and like your nose gets bigger and everything. Um, yeah, I mean it's once again it's sort of that wishful thinking where it's not like a great scenario for anybody who's missing a loved one, but yeah, it just feels like there's a lot of projecting going on, and I think it's worth maybe that's one of the takeaways in this episode is that we're working through here is that this is far from the only case where this goes on. Like we've seen this happen. What was the cruise ship lady again? Um,
Amy Lynn Bradley, of course.
yeah, yeah, and that's another example where
I wanna say off the bat, I kind of put a lot more weight on Amy Lynn Bradley situation. I just want to interject because I feel
yeah,
like there's actually a high chance that Amy Lynn Bradley is the woman in the picture found. Like, I know that our conclusion on that case was different, and I'm still leaning towards the conclusion that we came towards, that she potentially had an accident uh, on the boat, presumably because of the things that her father heard, because she was sleeping like in the balcony, and then the father heard like a weird noise, and we kind of suspect that that's when Amy Lynn Bradley potentially fell overboard. But I'm not gonna put it completely out of the question because Amy Lynn Bradley's case is a little different for me personally. I just wanted to interject and tell everyone that my opinion is still such that I think that that could be her in that picture, but not in this case, I think.
And it seems like it's a really human reaction, right? To
Yes.
try to try to make logic out of things and to like I said, I don't think it's I want to phrase this right because the other case, Amy Lynn Bradley. I mean, a lot of our commenters on that case, on that episode. I mean, we still get tons of comments on that episode. We've done like what, 2 episodes on it?
Yes, I think.
Trying to remember. Yeah, I mean, people have really strong opinions. There's a lot of people that just swear that that is her for sure. I think it might be if it's not her, then it is a very human reaction to try to draw connections and correlations to things that seem to logically make sense, right? Now, I know for that case, I had some specific kind of regional ideas and reasons why I did not think it was her, but that's just my opinion. That doesn't mean that I'm right. It is interesting though, because like I said, you have these two major, um, essentially national law enforcement agencies between Scotland Yard and the FBI, because they're essentially equivalent. And yeah, they had very differing opinions about who was who in there. But then, in the case of the young man in the picture, I mean, we have some very definitive evidence that it wasn't him.
Oh yeah, Michael Henley's body was found. Michael Henley's body was found. Let me just pull up the intel here. Um, yeah, so as I've said, Henley's mother was almost certain, but police believe that that was not the case. However, because the essentially Michael Henley's remains, the boys the boy that was in question, um, his remains were actually located in June 1990, so essentially almost 2 years after his disappearance, in the Zuni Mountains, about 7 miles away from his family campsite, because he went missing on a camping trip, and he essentially disappeared 75 miles away from where Tara Calico disappeared, and police just believe that Michael Henley actually wandered off and subsequently died of exposure. So we kind of now know that um, this was not Michael Henley in the picture. So yeah, that's true.
It's pretty sad. Just as like a side note, I was when I was watching that, I was I don't know, I've kind of mixed emotions about that because the kid didn't look like he was that young in the other photo that I've seen of him. When he was like, I saw a photo that looked like even he was even a little older than that photo you just showed, where it looked like he was, I don't know, how old was he when he died? Do you have that in your
I
in
don't
your?
really have the exact information. I just want to quickly throw in a picture. Were you referring to this picture?
Oh yeah, yeah, that one. I mean, to me, he looks like he's what, maybe 10 or 11 there.
I have no idea. I didn't catch that
Oh,
information.
I'm looking at his teeth. I'm looking at his dentition, just because my kid's gone through. I mean, he's at least like 8 or 9 there, because those are permanent teeth. It looks like that grew out, and you usually lose those around first or second grade. It looks like he's had those teeth for a while. Um, yeah, I don't know. It just I felt bad for him because I'm like, gosh, how do you even get lost on like this little hunting trip with your dad? It's kind of weird. Like I don't really understand how he kind of wandered off on his own. But kids do a lot of things that are not always well considered and certainly not deserved. And as we've seen from like the Jared Negrete case that I covered on sort of a side episode, it happens. People. It's actually not as hard to get lost in the woods as you would think.
Of
But
course.
anyway, I guess tying back to the case, it is significant because it starts to unravel this like you know New Mexico spree kidnapper, stranger kidnapper theory, right? Because then like as much as it was already a long shot for the reasons you listed, given the geography, the timing on the film, um, just
Yeah.
the logistics of it. I mean, it would be kind of hard to take care of two people you kidnapped. I mean, unless you had help. And then what? You're going to keep them like that all the time. I'll just also note that whenever I see somebody like that with tape over their mouth, um, I get worried for them for the obvious reasons, but I also get worried for them because that's really not safe. Like, someone could easily asphyxiate. Let me get that word out of my mouth right. Um, smother, essentially, like that. Because I mean, what if your nose is stuffed? What if you don't? I mean, I often don't have good nasal
Or
clearance. I guess. Yeah.
or just in general, I mean, this leads us to a bigger, not necessarily a bigger mystery, but a mystery nonetheless. Then, if this is not Tara and not Michael, then who the hell are these people? And also, does it look like a real picture? I don't wanna stop here for too long, but I will say, this does look to me like a real situation. This doesn't look like a fake situation, like the emotions from the eyes of the people in this picture. I don't know. It's to me, it seems like this was a real two people who were really kidnapped back in '89 in Florida. Like this doesn't look fake at all.
I'll say the boys' eyes sell it pretty well. You know what I mean? Because there's a lot of pictures. I mean, in the other shows I've seen, there are like people that have weird fetishes around this, and sometimes the woman in the photos, in some of these photos, it's like a role playing thing, right? It's like a weird fetish that both it's like consenting adults. Now here, the introduction, but like usually for those, you don't have a kid in them, right? You don't have any. It's like, the two adults together, or maybe the wife or the girlfriend's kind of playing along to like placate her weird kind of perverted husband or boyfriend. But in this, to have the boy in there inject something into this scenario that just doesn't feel right. Um, and then the lady doesn't look afraid, but there's like a look of contempt, I guess I would say, in her eyes. That's what I read when I look at it. Isn't Looks like she's looking at someone she doesn't like very much. At least she doesn't like that person very much in that moment. So if it is something that is like a gag, a prank, I don't know that she's so happy about it. And
Oh yeah,
maybe, I
oh
mean,
yeah.
I could say if it was a gag to explain how the kid is looking like that, I wouldn't want my hands tied behind me, like, and that thing over. I mean, that would drive me crazy, even if it was somebody I absolutely trusted. I would be very uncomfortable. That's sort of one of my
Yeah,
pet fears, I guess. You know what I mean? Like a little
of
bit,
course.
like if you're claustrophobic, you don't like your arms being held behind you like that.
Yeah, I agree. So, moving past this picture, let's dig deep more on Tara Calico's case. Let's dig deep more on why I kinda think that this case is as solved as it could be, because we even know the name. I think I know the name of the culprit. We know all of this information. So, really quickly wanna just notify everyone that in September of 2008, okay, so more recent times, investigators announced that they no longer believe that Tara was the girl in the photo. Instead, they have learned from witnesses that she was most likely killed on the day of her disappearance by men she knew from her high school. And what I'm talking about here is I'm gonna actually read a case file document here. You can find it online if you would just type in Taro Calico's police documents, and there would be sites where you could download this PDF. It's really simple to do. I managed to find it in literally like 2 minutes. So it's out there, but it seems like it's underlooked sometimes. So everyone could grab this document. And the interesting section of this document is essentially the report from an interview with a former deputy. that was investigating this case in 2008, Frank Methola. Okay, so interview with Frank Methola. So as I've said, Frank Methola was the deputy investigating this case, and like sheriff's department had an interview with Frank Methola about how Frank Methola interviewed Henry Brown. I know this is like Inception, but stay with me, guys. So Deputy Frank Methola said he made contact with Mr. Henry Brown. Henry Brown is the witness in this case, and he will detail the information about who he thinks killed Tara Calico and how it all happened. So, as I've said, Deputy Matola made contact with Mr. Brown at Mr. Brown's residence, and then Mr. Brown explained that he was dying and wanted to get this off his chest. Deputy Matola utilized his department-issued tape recorder for the interview. Mr. Brown explained that around the time of Tara Calico's disappearance, Lawrence Romero Jr. lived in a trailer home his father had as a rental property just down the street from him. Now, Mr. Brown explained that they had made a makeshift basement under the trailer home where they would party and smoke marijuana. Dave Silva and another friend that was tall and had red hair would also come to the home of Lawrence Romero, and basically Mr. Brown would also join them to party in that particular basement. Now, Mr. Brown said that on one occasion they were all there drinking margaritas and making fajitas. He was in the basement with them, and he had a weird feeling, so he looked down and noticed in, quote, a grave wrapped up in a blue tarp. Of what he believed was a small body, so we initially believed that this is Tara Calico. He said that they started talking about Tara Calico. They were searching for, and then they began talking about how they raped and killed her. I know that the wording here is a little bit awkward in this report. Mr. Brown said he knew the kids because he had worked at the school and he knew these kids smoked weed and skipped school. So I think Mr. Brown was an older individual, while Lawrence Romero Jr. was a kid, basically, well, a teenager or like a young adult. So Mr. Brown said one of them used to be uh, like her boyfriend, and one of them was jealous, something like that. They started talking about another friend that had been with them named Leroy Chavez. They started talking to him about what they had done and also warned him not to talk about it or they would come and get him. They said they were driving one of the guys' older truck that day when Tara Calico disappeared. They all knew that Tara and Jeff Abea had broken up at that point, and they also knew that she used to drive her bike on that highway, that was her regular routine. They also explained they hit her with the truck and then put her in the back of the truck with Leroy Chavez and then took her out to the gravel pits where they sodomized and raped her. Lawrence Romero Jr. By the way, Lawrence Romero Jr. is the son of the former sheriff, so this is why this case has a really strong sense of a cover-up happening here. So Lawrence Romero Jr., the son of the former sheriff at that point, said, quote, Tara got ballsy. She stood up and said she was going to make sure that they were all going to jail. Then Lawrence Romero Jr. went and got a knife from the truck, and David Silva and Leroy Chavez, and also that unidentified tall individual with red hair, held her down while Lawrence Romero Jr. stabbed and killed Tara. He said they drug her body and drug her body and put her in a bush nearby until they got nervous when the search started for her. He said they joked that they kept her, quote, nearby. Mr. Brown said he believed she was under the tarp and hidden in the grave in the basement because no one would look for her there. Also, Mr. Brown said this whole thing had to do with drugs. Jeff Abea and Lawrence Romero Jr. sold the drugs, and the only reason they never got caught was because Lawrence's father, Lawrence Romero Sr., was the sheriff, and that he heard that Lawrence Romero Jr. said that his dad hired Deputy Rivera, who's another shady cop, and that Deputy Rivera had their back. He also said that, quote, "Your sheriff there is not innocent." Sheriff Reen Rivera was out asking questions at the time when he was a deputy, and they said Deputy Rivera has our back. Mr. Brown said that he kept talking about a pond out by the property owned by a red-headed guy near the mountains. Mr. Brown believed that they took the body out to the pond on the property. Mr. Brown also said that they took the bike and took it to the junkyard in Berlin to get rid of it. He said that everything revolved around drugs, or all of them revolved around drugs. Lawrence Romero Jr. wanted that girl, but she was seeing Jeff Abea at the time, and she didn't want to have anything to do with Lawrence. So I think that's why Lawrence had a grudge for Tara. Now, Deputy Matola said that Mr. Brown died a few months later after this confession, but he also believed that Miss Brown, Mr. Brown's wife, is still alive and living there at the corner house of La Luz next to Charlie's Towing. He said Lawrence Romero Jr.'s rent house was 2 doors down. Now, Mr. Matola said that when he got the report, he did not know who was in charge of the case, so he contacted Sheriff Rivera and was told to bring his report directly to him. Mr. Matola said he needed to tag his cassette tapes into evidence first. Now, Mr. Matola said that later, when he was contacted by Melinda Ezequiel about his report. Now, Melinda was someone who made a movie, I believe, about the disappearance of Tara Calico. She was investigating it on her own. So Melinda contacted Frank Matola, and she pretty much said that Miss Melinda said that there was a record. He had taken a report, but there is no report of any documentation of any tapes placed into evidence. So at this point, Frank Matola messes up because he doesn't, or maybe he didn't mess up. He brought the tapes, but then Rivera, the now deputy, the former deputy sheriff, and now the actual sheriff at that point, he probably got rid of those tapes that Frank Matola had of the interview with Henry Brown, the dying man who was confessing on the deathbed. Now, Mr. Matola said that he later interviewed Ron Chavez, a cattleman in the area, about any ponds in the area because he was hoping to find more information about where Tara's body might be stashed. He was advised about a red and white house with a pond in the back. Mr. Chavez also said he understood that Rene Rivera, the then sheriff, the shady sheriff, had conducted the investigation surrounding the suicide of Lawrence Romero Jr. because Lawrence Romero Jr. committed suicide shortly after, after I think a few years after Tara disappeared, and that he also understood that there had been a note left behind confessing to the Tara Calico's murder. So Lawrence, the guy that we think that really killed Tara, he committed suicide and left a suicide note in which he stated that he did kill Tara. Now, Detective Rene Rivera not placed this into the evidence. Rivera had this suicide note, but he didn't put it in the evidence because he's shady, you know what I mean? So also we see that Frank Matola said he also interviewed a subject called Freddie Wakiki, a veteran that lived in the Llano area near the mountains. Frank Matola said he had been in the area looking for the ponds and was advised for a pond behind a red and white house. There were trees around the pond that had been cut down, and the pond extended more at the time of Tara's disappearance. Freddie believed the body of Tara Calico is buried in the pond behind this particular home. We asked, now the detectives are the the sheriff's, I guess, office, but now the not so shady sheriff's office, because Rene Rivera, the shady guy, was probably not already involved in this investigation. It's like an inception, it's hard to keep track. But so these guys now asked Matola about his report. um, uh, we asked Mr. Matola about how his report was treated, and did this affect his job? And then Frank Matola said he got in a disagreement with the sheriff when he arrested a Mexican national and was told by the Mexican that he worked for Rene Rivera. Mr. Matola said he got a call from Sheriff Rivera and was told the Mexican worked for him and he needed to let him go. So, Rene Rivera was probably like involved in a heavy, like, I don't know, like drug moving or something like that. Then Mr. Matola said he had already turned him over to ICE agents, and if he wanted to release him, he would need to contact ICE himself. I mean, so ICE, the people that deport illegals, of course, to get the illegal released. I mean, then Frank Matola said that after this event, he was removed from all the special teams and assignments he had been on, and after numerous write-ups, Mr. Matola said he resigned from the department. Frank Matola provided the directions to the home with the pond in the back that had a green fence, yeah, it's fence around it. He said the home is about 4.5 miles from the road between the high school and Las Marvillas on the Manzo Expressway. There are trees near the pond behind the home. Frank Matola said he believed the family that owned the home had an Irish sounding name, but he could not recall what it was. And Frank Matola said during his investigation of this report, he always heard the names of three young men Mr. Brown had given him, but he had not obtained any solid evidence. So I know this was a bit of a mess here, but just basically to explain to everyone what's happening here is essentially Frank Matola was investigating the disappearance of Tara Calico. He was in contact with a man on his deathbed called Henry Brown. Henry Brown confessed that he overheard Lawrence Romero, the son of the former sheriff, discussing with his friends how they killed Tara Calico, and that they essentially killed her, struck her with their truck while she was on her bike ride. Then they raped her. Calico then stood up and said that she's gonna report them to the police. That's when the three men involved in the disappearance of Tara Calico held her down while Lawrence Romero stabbed her to death. Then they hid her body in the bushes. Later on, when the search started intensifying, they got scared. They removed her body from the bushes, hid her body in their apartment, in their basement of the trailer truck that they were living at. Mr. Brown was actually looking at that body. Well, he didn't see it because it was covered, but the shape was of a body, and he thinks that that was actually Tara Calico. Later on, the man probably stashed Tara's body in some sort of a pond in the general facility, and all of this was covered up. Essentially because, former sheriff Lawrence Romero Sr. was the son of the main suspect. Now, the main suspect was also like a drug dealer, and there was a bunch of shady stuff happening there. And then the new sheriff, Rene Rivera, was also corrupt. At one point, he had illegals doing some sort of work for him, like illegal Mexicans doing some sort of work for him. So it's all corrupt. The whole town back in the late 80s, early 90s was really corrupt. And later on, the main suspect, Lawrence Romero Jr., commits suicide, leaves a note that he is responsible for the disappearance of Tara Calico, but then the new shady sheriff, Rene Rivera, takes that note, doesn't place that note into the investigation file, most likely burns it and for it to never be found again. So at this point, it seems like the case is right there. I mean, the former sheriff's son is responsible, in my opinion. And this is the home. We have it on the map of Lawrence Romero Jr. These are the various points where it's suspected that Tara's body is somewhere stashed around here. And was it even possible to understand what I was like going on about right now?
Yeah, I think so. It's interesting because this is obviously like this is one person's version of the story, right?
Yeah. Yep. And yeah, you're
Yeah,
right.
so that I mean that's the thing is I always wonder if the truth is somewhere between two extremes because it sounds like what's the name of this guy again with the report? Who the because
Frank
he's like
Matola.
a basically a disgruntled, yeah, he's basically a disgruntled former employee, right?
Yes,
Um,
exactly,
I
exactly.
I will point out I'll point out a couple of things. And like I said, this may seem a little. I'm doing this more for kind of context,
Of course.
maybe for people outside of the United States. So, there was like some stuff where it was like, well, um, the Rivera guy had like let's say illegal or undocumented nationals from other countries working for him. And I have to tell you, that's that's kind of the norm for a good percentage of the United States in different industries. So, especially like agriculture, or even like fast food, or anything that has wages, anything that has jobs where they're trying to pay wages below like a minimum wage, or for jobs that you essentially can't seem to find Americans who want to do it for anywhere near that wage. um, that's generally where like migrant labor um, comes in. So I mean it's funny because you'll even have people that are like, this isn't to get political, this is just literally saying reality. You'll have people that are maybe like anti-immigration, like in Congress, and then it turns out that like back home, like their housekeeper or their gardener, or somebody at one of their companies is undocumented and they knew it. um, so I don't necessarily damn anybody for that. I will say interestingly that the same Rivera you're talking about, is this Rene Rivera?
Yes.
That is the Rivera that's being okay. So it's interesting because he, unless you were about to talk about this, in 2008 pops up with his own version of this story.
Yeah. And
So
well,
that,
essentially, yeah.
yeah,
Well, but I think the timeline here kind of uh like I think, well, his story is the same as Frank Matola's story, if you know what I mean. Like basically
yeah,
says
with
that
just,
he has he basically has the same exact story but leaves out like his potential corruption out of it.
yeah, it leaves out his like leaves out the parts that make him look bad.
Yeah.
And then it was interesting because his statements, he makes a statement like he knows who did it, and like they just don't have enough evidence. And then when I heard that part, before we got to the rest of the explanation, when I heard that part, I'm like, well, wait a minute, like really in this small town, Like, I mean, what this is when you can't, like, play hardball? Because I mean, the law enforcement is not. It's not unheard of for law enforcement to play dirty, to get a confession out of a suspect, right?
Oh yeah.
I'm not saying violate anybody's rights, but like, yeah, this is when you bring them in for questioning and really turn up the heat and start harassing people and kind of blurring the line between legal and illegal activities in terms of getting a suspect to confess. So that's when like some other people who were either connected to the case or from the families were like, well, they can't believe that if he knew that if he knew this stuff, how could he not have like done what I just said? Somehow made a case. And then one of the videos I watched said that he said, well, um, I was just saying that to try to prompt somebody to come up to volunteer stuff. And like at first it sounded really stupid, right? Because I was like, well, that was like the weakest excuse ever. Oh, I was just kidding. But then I thought about it a little more and I was like, well, no, what if, like you said, he was part of this whole plot and he was kind of bluffing a little bit.
Yeah.
Like it was between bluffing and laying like a massive guilt trip where like some of these people, like presumably the former sheriff, if he was still alive at this point, and maybe some other relatives, maybe it was at the point where he was hoping this very public and somewhat embarrassing statement would kind of turn up the guilt factor and get people to kind of blurt out like, well, you see, because everybody's dead now, right? In theory, um, according to
Yeah.
that was the crazy part, by the way. Did you find that nuts that like these are all people that were in like what high school age in the early 80s, and then by the time this announcement gets made in 2008, they're all dead.
Yeah, well, Lawrence committed suicide and left a note stating that he killed. I mean, well, the only evidence we have of that is essentially Frank Mattola's statements, because Frank Mattola's statements that he gathered from Henry Brown. Well, but then those files, because it says in the file that Frank Matola used a tape recorder to record the interview with the dying man who confessed that he knew more information about Tara's disappearance. Now, from what I've gathered, is he brought the tapes, the recording tapes, audio recordings to Rene Rivera, and he must have destroyed it.
I mean, and like we have to probably couch this a little bit by saying, this is all alleged, right?
Yes,
This
of
is,
course. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. We don't want, you know, anybody to come running with lawyers. This is just sort of like we're saying it as if it was the point of view of the people making these allegations. Um, I
Yeah.
mean, I have to say, I feel like there's a lot more plausibility here. I mean, before we get to obviously our verdicts and our final analysis, it feels like there's some vein of truth that's being tapped into because it feels like it would just it would fit the statistical reality that most people are killed by somebody they know. Which isn't to say that there isn't stranger homicide and other like assaults and things like that that happen from strangers. But this, let's face it, it's a small town, and what really troubled me was Tara's mother, like saying, "Well, I'm creeped out because guys keep following us, but it's okay, Tara. You keep going by yourself." Like that.
Yeah,
As
I
much as
know.
that sounds like I'm picking on her mom a little bit, I gotta wonder. Like, I hope maybe they had a fight about it or something. Like maybe Tara was just really stubborn and was like, "Well, I got my workout. I'm not afraid. I'm not going to let anybody push me around." But the irony is here, if her mom had stuck around, maybe that would have been enough for them not to do it, right?
I think so.
Because that's two people.
That's that's a good point. But now looking at the map, one other thing that we kind of glanced over is another piece of evidence, like John F. Kennedy campground. For everyone who was watching this on our map, they kind of maybe looked at this particular point, and what it is actually so John F. Kennedy campground. Pieces of Tara's broken Walkman were also found at the entrance of this campground, and they were found 4 days after Tara's disappearance. So essentially, what we can gauge is that she must have gotten a hit. But if we believe that Lawrence Romero Jr. killed her, she must have gotten hit in this particular point. But then later on, she was most likely transported somewhere along the John F. Kennedy campground in Belen, New Mexico. You know what I mean? So just wanted to add that little point. So from that, we can gauge that she has been transported quite a distance from her initial route.
It's probably worth making a little side story there, because there was a weird thing that went on with the campground, right? Where
Oh yeah,
when they were looking around, I think her parents actually came to that campground, and I think the mother came first, and she was asking some questions, and there were some guys hanging out there drinking, kind of early in the day to be drinking. But I guess if you're having a camp out with the boys, maybe that's the perfect time to be drinking. Is
yeah,
you start early for an all day party. Um, if you're just drinking, but not doing other things. But yeah, so she goes and she sort of, you know, just is asking, and they seem kind of defensive. They seemed a little weird. They said they didn't see anybody, because she said, my daughter's missing. Have you seen her? And they're like, no, we've been here for, maybe since 10 o'clock or something. And this timeline changes later on, but they said, no, we haven't seen anybody. And then later on, her father shows up there, and this time they were like even more a little defensive, where like they wouldn't let anybody near the car. Like they kind of formed like a wall.
yeah,
Does that make sense? In front of them, and they seemed. Now look, in retrospect, if I was hanging out with the dudes and getting drunk, and by the way, they changed the timeline to like say, oh well, we've been here since 11:30. Um, but if I'm hanging out with the guys and we're drinking, and maybe there's some weed in the car. This is back when weed's not so not so kosher. In terms of like a respectable activity for parties or whatever kind of stuff they might have in the car, other drugs. That could be a reason to keep somebody away from your car. I mean, it's just because someone shows up and they're looking for a missing person doesn't mean they get to go poking through your stuff, right?
yeah.
I mean, who knows? They could have been poaching. They could have had a gun in the car. They could have been shooting up, signs on the highway. All kinds of reasons why they wouldn't want somebody poking around their stuff. But it was a little weird, and this got a little bit lost in my research. There was some kind of pile of like old Milwaukee cans that was near. Was that right? That it was near the wreckage.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
so. But then also when they asked the people who were drinking the beer near the
yeah,
campsite, it was like Budweiser, so it was a
yeah. They
different.
were drinking, but which, by the way, both of those are shit beers. So just like I guess neither of those will be a sponsor of the show, but both of those are like crap. Macro brew American beers, not
Yeah,
some of the much better beers we have now. By the way, if I would recommend one macro brew, it would be Coors. Coors is pretty good. Um,
yeah,
yeah, so Coors, your commercial here. Um, yeah, but yeah, it was a little bit of weirdness. I can't help but wonder. I mean, this is long before DNA evidence, and they must not have thought that it was enough of a clue to collect it. I mean, obviously, there's some flaws already potentially in this investigation that maybe are being called out here, but
yeah.
yeah, maybe just lost opportunity, if it was even an opportunity. I mean, a campground's gonna have a lot of beer if it's a kind of a drive-in campsite, that's like the drink and party campsite, and there's probably like a boatload of aluminum scattered around that whole campsite. So who knows if it's even at all related. But the important part is the broken Walkman, which potentially you have to wonder, like, okay, did that fall off of a car? Or was she brought there? Or that's sort of the only real link we have to her, to Tara potentially being brought to that site, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, since it was her Walkman, I think that must have happened. But that's kind of essentially all that we have in this case at this point. So as I've said, like for me, I'm kind of still leaning towards a cover up here. But maybe this is a good time to jump to the theory section, perhaps, and
Yeah.
maybe you would want to take that away because I see that you kind of have a few theories here written down, and I want to hear your take on this case because for me, the case, like it's for me, it's pretty simple. I'm kind of leaning towards Lawrence Romero. I would really like to know where that suicide note is at because if I could read it, then maybe I would even have a stronger conviction at this point. But other than that, well, there are a few possibilities, and I guess you wanna chime in on those a little bit.
Yeah, I'll do it in reverse order. So I'll do it from what I think is least likely to most likely, and I'm gonna just throw in a little bit of color. And of course, I don't want to just filibuster here. So if you have sort of your own take on what I'm saying, please
Of course,
jump in, to kind of so we can flesh it out.
of course,
Okay, so running away, right? This is kind of the standard thing we've always heard, whether it was some of our other kind of more popular cases. Whenever someone goes missing, I mean, the instinctual reaction is, well, how did we know they didn't disappear themselves, right? Either running away or suicide. In Tara's case, there's like zero evidence pointing to it. In fact, I would say there's even less pointing to it than some of our other cases, including some of our most recent episodes, where the person who went missing had some sort of like angst, or um, something that they were emotional about, or even sometimes someone important to them had like died in their life or something like that, or they were doing something risky. um yeah, no, there doesn't seem any reason for the Tara to either run away, or kill herself somehow in a way that would make herself disappear. Do you agree?
yeah, I agree. I definitely don't sense like that Tara disappeared on purpose or had some sort of um, like a suicide uh, yeah, ideas in her head because like the way that the evidence was. I mean, we have two shattered pieces of the Walkman, and to me, that indicates, and like some tire marks as well. So to me, that indicates that this was a devious scenario, and it wasn't Tara disappearing on purpose. Like just in general, we don't the things that we do have like solid evidence like the Walkman pieces, they're smashed and doesn't correlate with someone who would disappear on their own.
Yeah, yeah. So okay, that's one of the major ones down. The next one is, I think, what everybody thought, who came to the show like we did, sort of almost not a blank slate, but we saw a picture, we heard the person in the picture looked like a person who had gone missing right around that time. Um, this person could, at least be her stunt double, if not almost her exact double. And then when you kind of look at it more closely, it starts to fall apart. Like, it doesn't really seem as plausible anymore, even though you have, sort of some very reliable experts say, well, yeah, no, it probably is her, like Scotland Yard. Um, After you look at it, you're like, I don't know. It just seems like almost coincidental. And then you never really hear about anyone else who's missing being matched up to this, right? So, I mean, this could
Exactly.
be something else. Could be an abusive family situation where these people. The other thing, one thing I thought of. what if this was like a gag or a weird kinky thing that this lady was doing? I don't know why her kid's in there or the kid's doing it. But what if this person recognized herself? Because that was the thing, right? It was on hard copy or something like that. One of those kind of news magazine shows, tabloid, you know, shows. What if the person recognized herself and is like, "Oh my god, this is friggin' like humiliating. Like
Yeah,
this picture is now on the news." Like, so that would be a good reason to keep your mouth shut, right?
yeah,
Whether or not you're a victim. If you're a victim and you're still living in that situation, you don't have
yeah, exactly.
anywhere else to go, or it was just like, you humoring your boyfriend, and then you don't really want everybody to know that you guys are like sort of weirdly kinky and somehow inappropriately looping in a child. Yeah, it's a good reason to keep your mouth shut, maybe. If you don't, I mean, like a good reason from their point of view,
Yeah,
not
maybe
for
maybe that's the
justice.
situation. Maybe these. That's a good point. I never thought about it. Maybe these people are alive and well, and maybe it's a period in their life that they want to forget, even though it seems like it's a really serious ordeal. You know what I mean?
I mean, what's crazy is that little boy, if he's actually alive, he's like my age now.
Yeah,
Um, I mean, or probably even older. Um, you know, makes you wonder what went on in that person's life or
yes,
these people's lives. But yeah, it doesn't, as much as like that seems to be the focus. A lot of people always worry about these random kidnappers because it does happen for sure. I mean, we've seen it on our show. There are all these different manners of weird creeps, unfortunately, that do stuff like this. And I'm not sure whether to save this for the next point or not. Um, I'll do it now
of
because
course, of course.
I
Yeah,
think I think I think I think the next point I got enough to say about the final theory or the final main theory. But I, I, I don't know if it's the same for you, but sometimes I think like as men, and this isn't me like white knighting it or trying to get on like a real PC like um kind of like soapbox, but I think as a guy, like for most men, our experience isn't really usually that we get kind of harassed as much as women do, and some of it's like
oh yeah, of course.
some of it's what I mean. Some of it's like gender and statistical stuff where there's just statistically most men are not chasing after other men as much as they're chasing after other women, which isn't to say there isn't a subset of men that like Jeffrey Dahmer
Of course.
that do or John Wayne Gacy that do stalk other men and young men. But statistically, it's just not as frequent.
Yes.
Um, so, like, I'll tell you that I mean, people that I know in my own life, like, have been. I mean, it happens a lot. Have been either victimized or approached or creeped on by like complete strangers in weird ways. I mean, whether it was like walking home or walking out in public or even at the mall, just having weird guys like, and I don't mean in like, because obviously some of it's cultural, right? If you go to like, I've heard if you go to Italy, it's kind of normal to have guys kind of hooting at you and whistling and saying things in different cultures, almost like how construction workers are stereotyped here, where like in this culture it's not as appropriate. I don't even mean in that way. I mean like some guy following you all over the mall for like 2 hours, or a guy driving up to you in his car and offering to give you a ride. Or I'll say this has even happened like not far from where I live, just adjacent to the university. Guys pretending to be Uber drivers to maybe try to kidnap you,
Yeah.
which has happened and actually did happen. There was someone that was convicted recently who did that, who pretended to be a shared, like an Uber driver or something like that, or a Lyft driver, and then kidnapped and killed a lady.
Hmm.
So, like that for sure happened. So I can understand. Sorry, I gotta clear my throat for a second.
Yeah, it's okay.
So I can understand why people would think that maybe that's what's going on there. It's not impossible
Hmm.
by any means. Okay, so, but I don't think that's what happened here. I don't think that's what happened to Tara. Um, in part based on you know what some people have said happened, including that former sheriff who made that public announcement, and like one of his former reports. One of the people who reported to him, one of his former employees who certainly seems disgruntled and seems to be kind of unleashing the whole kitchen sink on him.
Yeah.
Um, I feel like the real truth is somewhere in there. I think it does seem very possible that, some local guys all all drunk and maybe high, and kind of like, when guys are in groups, it can get even worse, right? Because maybe someone doesn't want to back down, or like the judgment's out the window. I'll say that this is the other thing. Is like maybe one last rant. Um, Something about teenage boys, like it's weird. There's like this big split where there seems like there's one group of teenage boys, and maybe this is like testosterone levels, so maybe I wasn't like as testosterone out as some guys, but like I I often see like there seems to be a set of like teenage guys that would do really stupid, like high risk. I used to see it around my neighborhood, like some kid who was sort of like lived in the area, I guess. I remember when I moved into the neighborhood, and he's like sort of from my same demographic and everything, roughly, so maybe roughly the same. And parents are kind of ballpark, same income level, whatever. But this kid was like a freaking menace, and his friends were too. Like his close friends were like they were like borderline. It was for sure criminal activity. It wasn't, master criminal like going to jail for a long time. But like if he'd been arrested from, at the wrong moment, he would have gotten at least like a DUI and maybe some other stuff going on. And it's weird because like I remember when I was that age, that 16, 17 years old, that wasn't me. But then I run into like other guys with like it seems to be that was them getting into fights all the time, stuff like that. It's always kind of amazes me. Sometimes I think my parents were really like don't even know how spoiled they were. You know, like like I think I got judged by like daughter rules and not son rules by my behavior. But anyway, getting off that my little soapbox for that, I'll say that the one thing I don't believe though about that whole account is I don't believe that Tara was involved in any kind of weird drug plot. Like, yeah, if drugs were involved, I don't think she, and I even doubt that any of her boyfriends, to her knowledge, had anything to do with that. Like, yeah, maybe there's some kind of drug business going on. I think, as you and I had kind of mentioned prior to the show, um, you know, states that are along the border to our south, including my state, have heavy involvement in smuggling routes and human trafficking, and especially narcotics trafficking. And to that extent, there are a lot of payoffs and there are a lot of people working as part of those organizations in some method or fashion, right? I mean, how else do you get literally hundreds of tons of drugs,
Oh
you
yeah,
know,
of course.
yeah,
Yeah.
past the border? So okay, yeah, that. But I don't. I kind of almost feel like if those guys really did say that stuff in those confessions, then maybe they were trying to like somehow victim blame a little bit. They were like, well, she deserved it because, when you're dating Tony Montana from Scarface, you know, some of that goes with the territory if something, if someone cuts off your head with a chainsaw. So like from that perspective, I gotta wonder. I also don't believe that if she threw any kind of tantrum about, not tantrum, if she was like, I'm gonna tell on all of you. I'm gonna, bring the cops down on your heads. I'm gonna bring trouble. I don't believe that she would have done that after a sexual assault. Like I feel like after the sexual assault, they would have just killed her and not let her go and you know what I mean. Like that would have they would have felt really shameful for what they did and realized they needed to cover their tracks. Now the one of the versions I heard is that she got mad at them when they hit her in the car.
Mm.
So maybe at that point, like they were messing with her. That was one version I heard. They were messing with her. They hit her with the car. Maybe like didn't really intend. They were kind of pretending like they were going to hit her, but then actually hit her. And then when she's sort of knocked down and scraped up, and her bike's all messed up, and it's like, oh, now you've just assaulted somebody or battered somebody, depending on state law. Um,
Yeah.
then they were like, oh well, well, you can't talk to us like that, and they're all drunk and stuff and aggro. That's what I see. So that's
Mm.
my version. So I don't know. What do you think of that?
I think, yeah, I think, as I've said, for me, I'm definitely leaning towards this particular line of thinking. I don't know exact details. You made some really good points that maybe it wasn't a planned sexual assault. Maybe it was like they were joking around, accidentally hit her, and then they, did kill her and hid the evidence. So, I mean, it could go, either way, but I would still lean towards that, the sheriff, like, I mean, the guy committed suicide, like, that's a fact. Whether he left the note, we don't know. We can just speculate that there is this suicide note that explains his involvement in the disappearance of Tara Calico, but at the same time, we know that he committed suicide. Like, we know that. That's not, like, fake. So, I don't know. Heavily suspected. The dude's heavily suspected, then commits suicide. Kind of seems like we have our guy here, to me at least.
Yeah, it seems like it. I mean, it does make me once again think that, like, sometimes I wonder if you see this behavior, this kind of bullying and harassing behavior, as strange as it seems, that like in a small town you think there would be more consequences. But I always wonder if, like, in small towns, or it's towns that aren't massive, like, whether people just get more bored. Because I know, from the my country, my wife's from a tiny country, and she's, like, mentioned a lot of sort of small town antisocial behavior that she's seen, that frankly was foolish. I mean, and I'm not going to say the stories here, but there's a couple stories from that my wife's that are, like, verified, that my wife's told me about, where from where it was like small town people
Yeah,
didn't really realize what they were messing with, and,
yeah,
like, got in trouble with, like, a bigger force, let's say. um and, like, maybe that's kind of an example of this here, where, like, small town, because, like, everybody knows that drives on that freeway that this attractive young lady is going to be riding by on a bike, which isn't blaming her. I mean, she certainly has a right to ride a bike, and not be harassed. But now it's like these guys have a time and a place where, when they get liquored up and maybe high, and then it's like they're not living in Los Angeles or, London or someplace like that, where there's literally millions of attractive people everywhere. Well, they're going to go basically look at that.
yeah.
And maybe that's where things just got out of hand, where it's people with small time thinking and low impulse control. And yeah, I mean, that's so I guess we're getting to the part where we do the percentage breakdowns. So I'm going to say who I'm going to lock it in, man. 95% this last theory is the one that happened.
Lawrence Romero
Well, or
and his
some,
friends.
yes, some variation. If not them, then a similar group of guys from her town or the immediate area, that were known to the area and known to law enforcement.
Uh,
Um,
yep.
yeah, that they probably people probably did know who did it, and for whatever reason, it was covered up. And I'm gonna put 0% for the suicide or runaway theory, and I'll put, like, I guess that just leaves me 5% left for the complete stranger wandering into the area and decides to randomly victimize this lady riding a bike
How about
theory.
the Polaroid picture?
Yeah, yeah, sort of like the Polaroid. Well, like that. I don't think the Polaroid's her, but I'll say that, like, some scenario where somebody did something like that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll put that at, like, 5%.
I see. I see. Yeah, same here. Same here. I think I agree with you. Kind of almost identically, I'd say. Definitely don't feel like she ran away. Definitely think that there's a lot here. That if someone would really dig down, well, everyone's kind of dead, so it's hard to do that. But I think Lawrence Romero Jr. had something to do with Tara's disappearance. And I would say, yeah, probably like 95%. And then the 5% I would, attribute to any other theory, which I still think that any other outcome is kind of unlikely here. And yeah, I think, before we sign out, dude, you want to add anything to the audience?
Yeah, I mean, said I always look forward to the user comments, the viewers and listeners. Um, I will say, if you're listening to this in the podcast, there's still pretty difficult for us to see the comments on the many different places you can get our audio show. So if you can come by the YouTube, even if you don't watch the YouTube of it, it's a great place to leave a comment and get us directly. I think you'll find we almost always respond right away to questions or topic suggestions or feedback. So, really looking forward to, what everyone else thinks now that we've presented our version of how we think things went and, our opinion of the photo in this now, pretty famous case.
Yeah. Thanks so much, guys, for joining us this week. And as always, I hope you all stay safe and will enjoy the rest of your week. And we'll catch you next week. And until then, stay safe and peace out.